This is a place.
This is the place.
This is a place. We want to talk about. This is a place.
Thank you for listening to This is a Place podcast. My name is Brandon, and I'm joined by a man who went to a haunted house that only played 70s music. Nate.
At first I was afraid. I was petrified, but I survived.
Good. I'm glad you did. I appreciate when a haunted house goes out of their way and plays different music.
Plays different music?
Yeah.
I don't know if I've ever really noticed haunted houses playing music inside the house. Maybe out in the parking lot.
I guess maybe I'm thinking more, maybe it's usually in the prep. So I went to the Haunted Hollow last week, a couple weekends ago, and they have a waiting area outside and they're playing music. And it tends to be the same stuff. You know, everybody goes back to the Ghostbusters, the Thriller, Monster Mash. I mean, great, solid music. But it's good when they mix it up and they throw in different stuff that still fits into that vibe.
That's true. I've never been to that one, but I remember our first time going to Haunted Forest because those two are related, right?
I believe so. I think they're in the same family.
And I just remember going to the Haunted Forest and like you know, out of the parking lot, you go into like, I want to say like a little barn looking type building, dance hall type thing. And you walk through the line. And then when you get to the front of the door, you're like, finally, we're going through. All it does is take you outside to another huge line. It's bigger than the one you were just in. So you're like, oh, well, that was disappointing.
So Haunted Hollow and Haunted Forest are definitely the same family because that's the exact same thing that happened.
Oh, really?
You go through, they've got the line to get your tickets. You go through a house they've put together, a haunted looking house in the front. Go through that, enjoy some scares, come on the other end, and then you have the long outside wait.
Mm-hmm. And
they had over on the side a kind of a shack thing, and then what you go into is this big, I can only describe it like a cave with a skeleton head on the front. But yeah, it's pretty similar. You end up waiting that line. We did opt for the fast passes to get through it a little bit quicker.
It's been a while. I think it's been 20 plus years since I've been to the Haunted Forest.
Have you done any haunted houses this year aside from Frightmares?
No, we just did Frightmares. And I wanted to do our friend of the podcast haunted house, but Murray City's not cooperating.
Yeah.
So Dead City's not opening up this year, unfortunately, but they are taking all their gear and stuff to the Asylum 47. Is that what it's called?
49?
49, 47, 48. Math is hard. Out in Tooele. So I don't know if I'm going to have time to get out and visit them before the end of the year. So I'm just a little disappointed that Dead City didn't pull through.
They would have.
They would have. I should say Murray City. So shame on Murray City. I think we should make some of those banners that those people hold at stoplights saying shame on whatever. And we'll just hold one outside City Hall at Murray. Shame on all of them for not helping making things happen.
Shutting down an awesome haunted house.
Yeah. But I do kind of want to check out the Castle Chaos because they keep advertising it's like one of the best in the country. I've always wanted to check out Fear Factory. It just seems like the ambition's there and then there's not enough time. And then Halloween's over.
Yeah, it goes fast. That's why you have to start in September. Because if you don't, the whole season runs out too quickly.
Well, that's what I loved about Dead City is most of the haunted houses when Friday the 13th falls on Friday the 13th. when Friday the 13th happens, they open up for that weekend usually. But that's not every year something like that happens. But Dead City just had different events throughout the year to kind of keep that Halloween spirit alive year round. And so it's kind of sad and unfortunate that that's not going to happen this year. Like we went to Krampus last year, right?
Yeah.
So that was pretty cool. Something different to do during the holidays, out of the normal caroling or whatever people do during the holidays. But it was fun. I was looking forward to it this year. So again, disappointed.
Coincidentally, we're talking about another haunted house today, one that neither you or I had a chance to attend. I mean, if you would have went, you'd have been like 1. How old are you?
I would have been 1 and 2. 81 and 82.
I wasn't here. You were too young, but it lasted 2 years. It was a spook alley put on by a ward, and it was worth its whole own episode. We had the chance to speak with the son of one of the founders of the Caligari's clinic. And so let's hear our interview with Denver Robbins.
Well, this is definitely an oldie then. It's 40 years ago this year.
Oh, really?
Yeah, this is the 40-year kind of celebration that has been happening on Facebook, and I'm just lucky enough to have all of the photographs and all of the planning documents that went into making this, and I've been wanting to do this for a couple years, and this is the time.
Cool. 40th anniversary seemed to be a good time to do it.
Right, it fits.
It's good timing.
Well, Denver, could you first tell us who you are outside of running this Facebook group?
Oh, sure. I am a creative executive. I do creative production for motion picture and television, corporate industrial. I've been doing that as a producer for 25 years, right around there. Based here in Salt Lake City, and father of 3, and yeah, just doing my thing. I'm a big Halloween fan of the season, of course. Growing up this way, I suppose that happens. I started out as a makeup artist, and we can get into that a little bit, I think, as a result of this haunted house growing up.
And I'm assuming that was with Rocky Point.
I did do work with Sydney, yeah, after the haunted house of Caligari's clinic. A lot of the work, a lot of work was done together between Sid and my father. And,
oh, really?
Yeah. So I've known Sid for a lot of years, about 31 years now, actually.
So we did an interview with her our first year of the podcast. We did a
Nice.
whole Rocky Point thing at her studio that she built.
Yeah.
In Salt Lake.
There are definitely pictures of me in that museum studio. Yeah.
Small world.
It is. Small Lake City, they call it.
Small Lake City.
Right.
That's true.
To be honest with you, I don't know how I found this group. I've heard your name a couple times. We listened to a podcast. I think you listened to Radio Ronin.
Yeah, I was just listening to that. Yeah, Chung is a good friend of mine. I'm actually going down to see him in a couple weeks.
So I'm assuming that's how I found it, but one way or another, I found this group about this haunted house or a spook alley that your father and a couple other individuals put on for a couple of years.
Yeah, called Caligari's Clinic in 1981 and 1982. And it originally started as an LDS ward fundraiser. And I was in today's day and age, I can't imagine that being happening. But yeah, it started out as a Mormon LDS ward fundraiser, and my father, Ken Robbins, his friend Scott Denhalter, and their friend Selden Young got together and proposed this and produced it. My father was the art department and the makeup department. Scott did all the creative writing, and Selden did all the production. And the three of them, in coordination with what seemed like the entire adult neighborhood at the time there in Syracuse, a couple hundred people, put on this spook alley for 2 years. And it took place in a place called Freeport Center in Clearfield, Utah, which was an old military base. Now it's an industrial warehouse space. But there were a bunch of abandoned buildings. A World War II era jail was year 1, 1981, and a World War II era hospital was 1982.
One of the things I read, there was an introduction that said Caligari Clinic was created in 1981 by the 7th Ward Bishopric during an extended state of drug-induced psychosis. The clinic is by nature a spook alley whose purpose is to generate fun, fellowship, and cash for the Stake Welfare Fund. You already said it, but it's crazy to think of something like that happening nowadays. I know,
especially in a drug-induced state. Yeah.
Yeah, the bishopric, right?
Right. That was. I'm certain that was Scott's creative writing doing. He did all the writing, and yeah. Sorry. Continue. It's exactly right.
It's awesome. I know of at least one or two bishops that listen to our podcast, and this is a call to them to step up the game. Maybe not the drug-induced. I'm not advocating for that, but a spook alley of this level, I think we could.
Is the trunk or treat not doing it for you, Brandon?
Trunk or treat just isn't cutting it when you look at this thing.
And don't they always say when you sign up for a trunk or treat, don't make it too scary?
Right.
I've never been to a trunk or treat in my life, and I'm not certain what it would be like other than maybe like a football game tailgating party. That sounds right up my alley.
Well, seems like a lot lately. They call it a trunk or treat, but they move it inside the building, and then everybody's assigned a door. So you, instead of going to a house, you go to a door, a different room. That's the ones I've been to lately, and they're always
do a pretty good job.
Yeah, they do a good job, but they're always trying to be like, don't be too scary, don't scare the kids. So
where's the fun in that?
But
I went to a preview screening last night of the new Halloween movie, and it was a scary movie.
The new one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was definitely a scary movie, but I remember Halloween in my time not necessarily being scary like these new movies, which is really scary, really bloody, really gory, not fun at all. And I remember Halloween and even those old Halloween movies being like scary fun, like telling scary stories around a campfire fun, or ghost stories around a campfire fun.
Yeah, like the jumpy, scary type stuff, right?
Sure, yeah.
Instead of the gory Michael Myers type stuff, even though I do enjoy that sometimes. So one thought I just had is, if someone tried to do this today, would it be more difficult with just the city codes and everything like that? Do you think it was more relaxed back in 81, 82 than it would be today to just go use an abandoned warehouse and try to get something like this going?
Yeah, I don't think it would be any more difficult as it related to codes. It would be difficult to pull off because it was it was unlike any other haunted house that I had ever seen and have yet to see, to be honest. Sid and Rocky Point did an amazing job. Their artwork and their set pieces were absolutely amazing, but much like the haunted houses you can go to today, they're walkthroughs, right? And you walk through and you'll get a vampire room, and you'll get a zombie room, or get a themed room like a Jason Voorhees or Friday the 13th kind of room. And then you get jump out, people acting and people scaring, things like that. Caligari's Clinic wasn't that at all. Caligari's Clinic was first and foremost a play, but the audience wasn't sitting in seats watching a theater. The audience was wandering around these rooms in groups, and each room had a very specific story element that played out. The haunted house, the spook alley in all was a one cohesive story. You were essentially a tour group in this clinic, this medical clinic that you were going on a tour, a public tour. The actors had lines, there were characters and tour guides. It was a play. It wasn't a jumpy, scary haunted house like you see today.
So it had like a story then, like a beginning and an end.
There was a script. You had to memorize your lines, and every time a group came through, you performed your scene, and then the group moved on.
That's pretty cool. I just got back from Universal Studios, and we thought it was a ride, and it looked like Indiana Jones style. I didn't know what it's called, but it was kind of like that. You start out with an actor, and she moves you to a different room, and then to a different room, and playing out something. I don't know what she was doing.
Was this Florida or California?
The Florida one.
Oh, nice. I'm going to be there in December, actually.
Oh, nice. It's probably a better time to go than we went when it was wet and rainy.
Yeah. Speaking of small world, the Halloween Horror Nights there in Universal, Florida, the makeup department is run by a man named Michael Burnett. And Michael was also worked with Sid at Rocky Point doing some makeup coordination with him. And then Michael was also an employee of Michael Burnett, Michael was also an employee of Rick Baker, who did consulting on Caligari's clinic as well. So it's a small little world.
Yeah, don't burn your bridges, right? Because come back and bite you.
Going back to the more storytelling nature of it, there's not really a haunted house, at least in Utah that I know of, that incorporates that sort of layout. Everything relies on the jump scares, and you're going around corners, and it's not as much of a story.
Yeah, not that I've seen. And it was a coordination feat because there were about if I remember, 6 different tour guides, and a tour group would be about 8 to 10 people. So, for example, the first tour guide was the Count, your typical sort of Lon Chaney Dracula. He would pick up a group and walk them through several rooms, and then hand off the group to another character called Dr. Bones, which is just a great big skeleton. And where that handoff would happen would be just on the opposite wall of where a new group would be ready to be picked up by the Count. And so they were just doing these loops, and they would end a group and immediately pick up another one and do the next loop. And same with Dr. Bones. Dr. Bones' appearance to pick up the group from the Count was a revolving door. He would spin on this platform in a revolving door and then pick up this new group. Well, by the time he took his group through the second phase and ended up in what was the operating room, he would stand up against a wall and revolve and be right there ready to pick up another group. And so the throughput was amazing, given they were only doing little groups of 10, but it was much like that. It was controlled by traffic controllers, people who were coordinating the timing. That's why you had to have your lines down and memorized and be on time. And also stoplights. They had buttons and stoplights. They could say, okay, you're clear to go now, and then the group can continue on.
Yeah, a lot of logistics involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the cool thing about it, I saw somewhere it had at least 200 people that were a part of this, and you're saying most of them adults from the community. I think that alone is a feat in itself, because you go to any of the haunted houses, it's a lot of employing teens and maybe younger adults, but the fact that all those adults came out to make this happen, I mean, not to disparage the teens, but I think the adults saw that adding more of the theatrics to it, and really were able to make it happen.
Oh yeah. Everyone was having a great time. I've got photographs of the cast room where they're all getting ready and putting on makeup and costumes and smiling and laughing and goofing around. And it was one great big neighborhood. And we joke, when all the adults are off doing this haunted house, between rehearsals and building, and then the 2 performance, I think it was 4 performance days, I'd have to look. It was just a bunch of kids kind of left on their own. And so they started a babysitting service with a few of the other adults in the neighborhood, and all the kids gathered at one great big house for however many nights it was, all the kids were in one spot.
As you say, that was before internet and really Disney Plus, all that good stuff to
make your own entertainment,
make babysitting easier.
Yeah, it was a lot of people. I have the job lists. Like I said, I've got all the documentation from all this, and I counted one night and just like, gosh, there are 200 slots here for people to fill on all these jobs as I was going down the lists.
So how did you participate in the Spook Alley?
Well, at the time I was 8, so I was in with all the kids.
Okay.
And so, but there was a contingent of teenagers that were in the Spook Alley. I was there during the build process, helping my dad. I often say that I grew up behind set, and this is what I mean. I grew up building with my father and helping him out with the makeup where I could, and spent a lot of time during the build-up process, but not while the haunt was going on. I would have just been in the way. But the Caligari's clinic had a really unique place for the teenagers. There's a writing technique that's used in film to prove that the situation is really serious, especially in a dramatic scene. And honestly, it's just you kill somebody, right? You kill somebody really early on to prove to the characters that this is a very serious situation. And that's a little bit difficult to do in a live performance, especially one like this. But the haunted house or the spook alley had ringers that were plants in the group, and so a ringer would join a tour group right at the very, very beginning and just blend in with the crowd wearing normal street clothes. And they were teenagers and they were adults, and their job was to, on cue, vomit, pass out, freak out, fake vomit, obviously, and show to the other audience members that this is really serious. This is really scary. The adults would often get taken away by security or taken away by fake EMTs from having passed out. But the teenagers had a really fun special role. There was a place called the Ringer Closet, and the little teenagers would start getting scared, freaking out a bit. And while that was happening, one of the guards, there was always guards in the tour group, and they were dressed as these big monks in monk robes, would slip a carabiner around a harness that this kid was wearing. And the tour guide, having been completely fed up at this point, would say, be gone. And that ringer would be ripped through the wall, a spring-loaded wall, and disappear from the crowd. Some of the other things that the teenagers would get, they would get grabbed by monsters. They had a Frankenstein monster that would jump out of a shipping crate and grab a kid and run off into the dark with him. It was a ringer. And people would never see that kid again. They were spent wondering what in the world happened.
That sounds insane. Insanely fun too.
Yeah.
That would have scared me. I mean, there's no way you would have known that they weren't a part of the show.
No.
That never happens at haunted houses these days. I've never experienced it.
My father and Scott and Selden all came from the motion picture world. And so they kind of knew what to do and how to do these performances and write essentially a story or a movie that was playing out in front of you.
So do you have any clue like how many people would go through the haunted house each year?
I don't know what the throughput was. I'll have to ask. There's some anecdotal numbers that just say hundreds, right, in newspaper articles. Hundreds per night, but it's hard to tell. There are photographs of what was the lobby area, a great big room, just packed full of people waiting, and there were easily in those photographs a couple hundred in the waiting room at a time. Not bad for a little haunted house in the 80s in rural Utah.
I read that there was, in 1981, 22 rooms and 26 rooms in 1982, and obviously with any haunted house, each room has their own theme, but there was some, from what I could see, at least two things that's jumped out to me as really unique and scary. I saw one about a tarantula room, actual live tarantulas, and one or two rooms with real amputees that were at the disposal of the staff.
The butcher. Yeah, absolutely. So the clinic, well, here's the backstory, right? The backstory is that the clinic started out as a medical facility, but because of budget cuts and lack of participation, the medical clinic explored some product lines, let's put it that way. And so a lot of the rooms were named along those lines, like the solid waste room or the liquid byproduct room or the solid byproduct room and so on. The amputee was a solid byproducts room. We always just called it the butcher, but the way that worked was there were two amputees in that room. One of them was actually missing a leg and another one missing an arm. But when the audience members would come into the room, the person who was the butcher missing an arm would be wearing a fake prosthetic arm that was attached underneath a sleeve, a Velcro sleeve. They would spend, what would happen is as the audience was coming through, the butcher would be sawing off the leg with a skill saw and then grab this leg, and the guy was screaming, of course, and because he's an amputee, he could lift up what was left of this, stump with a prosthetic on it, a bloody prosthetic. He could rile, and it would be very obvious that he wasn't hiding a leg under a table somewhere. And the butcher would go over to the meat grinder, start it up and start feeding the leg in there, and then get his prosthetic arm, which was actually just somebody inside grabbing it and pulling it off. And it would rip off the Velcro sleeve and everything, revealing another bloody stump, and he'd go running around, and it was good fun. And then the tarantula room was just, they called it the sand trap in room one, and then the tarantula room. It's, a lot of Caligari's clinic was just based on core fears, and arachnophobia being one of them. These corpses people would be holding and handling tarantulas, and there were ladybugs and all sorts of crickets and things on the ground as well. And it was just a creepy, crawly, buggy room. Tarantulas are quite gentle, but they're big and scary. That one of those tarantulas in that room, we ended up named it Kelly, and ended up being a pet in our household for many, many years. I didn't know this, and I wondered when I was writing that post if my memory was just faulty. Did we get another tarantula? But apparently tarantulas can live up to 20 years in captivity. So that tarantula lived well into the 90s.
Oh, wow.
That room alone would have been scary enough for me to run right through.
Yeah, I would love to see Brandon go through this one.
I don't do well with the haunted houses we have now. I don't know how I would do with this one. It wouldn't go
Yeah, this one, I would pay good money to go through this one.
Oh yeah,
$3 sounds like a
$3.
bargain right now.
Right? Yeah.
It probably was even a bargain back then, but just with how much work and how much time, and I'm sure resources that went into putting this together.
Yeah, all in all, I think their budget was about 20 grand, right around there.
So I know that they got an invite to go to Hollywood, correct?
Yeah, they actually, I don't know if it was a formal invite or they just said, we need some advice. Let's go seek out the best name we know in this. And at the time, so this would be, 81, 82, that would be right around American Werewolf in London. Rick Baker was doing that, or had just completed it. I don't remember. And so they went out and spent some time with him and got some advice and got some professional tips, and then came back with whatever they did and made it better.
Yeah, you said Rick Baker, who's very acclaimed.
Yeah, special effects makeup artist, trained under another makeup artist named Dick Smith, who's kind of the grandfather of special effects makeup artist or makeup work. Rick Baker has won more Academy Awards for makeup than anybody else. You may not know him specifically, but you've definitely seen his work. He did the monsters in the canteen scene in Star Wars, and American Werewolf in London, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, Gorillas in the Mist. Goodness, the list is hundreds of films long.
What happened? Why did this stop? Why did it only last for 2 years?
I know that in 1983 they tried to do it again. I don't know why it didn't happen. I know that the LDS Church decided that perhaps the Spook Alley was probably not the best way to raise funds, and so that they separated paths. But for some reason, I've seen in the documents some proposals to do it again in 1983, but it never came to fruition, and I'm not exactly certain why. But from this, a company was created called Proteus Productions, and that was my father and Selden and Scott doing special effects makeup. That lasted for a few years afterwards, and that's when I kind of picked up the mantle of special effects makeup and started doing it professionally through the 80s and 90s, and also how I got my father introduced me to Sid and how I got involved in that as well.
Did you ever actually go through the haunted house itself?
I did, yeah, several times. This is how I grew up, and so my movie watching with my father was a lot of horror films, and it was always an educational experience. The first time I ever set foot on a film was Halloween 5, actually.
Oh, you worked on that?
No, we just crashed the set. It was we went there one night, and my father knew it was in town because of the makeup work he was doing, and again, I was young at the time, so we just showed up.
Yeah, we're gonna watch that tomorrow night, aren't we, Brandon?
Yep, that's gonna be one of our episodes for this month.
Halloween 5? Well, I was there during the filming of the jail scenes.
Well, I think it's cool that something like this sounds like it had a big influence on you and really has put you where you're at in your career and the things that interest you. A small, very well put together spook alley that lasted just 2 years.
Yeah, it definitely has been influential. It still is part of Halloween is still a huge part of my life, and I love haunted houses. I'm a huge fan of Disney's Haunted Mansion. Yeah, in fact, you can see it back there on the wall. That's the patent for the conveyor. That's a Haunted Mansion, and the Omni Mover. And above it, you can't see because of the camera, unfortunately, is the elevation layouts for the Haunted Mansion. So I'm a big fan. So yeah, just to say that it was influential, I think is a small way to describe it. I'm looking forward to going back to the one in. We're going to be hitting Disney World again as well in December, and it's been a while since I've seen the Haunted Mansion at Disney World. I'm looking forward to seeing it again as well. I did go. I was back in Disneyland a couple of months ago just for a day because I was out there working, and it was the first time I'd seen the Haunted Mansion in its traditional form, because I've seen it so many times for Christmas and for Night Before Christmas. It's been a while since I've seen it in its original form. It's kind of fun. Yeah, very very quaint. It was nice.
I saw as well, talking about the 40th anniversary of this, looks like you have a way that they can get t-shirts as well.
Yeah, there was a t-shirt that was made that has two skulls, and it says, Caligari's Clinic, 1982. And about, I think 4 years ago or so, Selden found in a storage unit a box of those. And so there are probably about 15 to 20 of them still, original retro ones floating around. But again, I've got all the artwork and I've got all of the photographs. And so we've had them reprinted. On that Facebook group, there's a link to, I think, an Etsy page that you can get a t-shirt. They're really cool. They're very retro, kind of just basic black and white skulls.
Do you ever see something like this come into fruition again? Anything you'd ever be interested in being a part of?
There have been some talks here and there. Something like this would require at least a year in planning to make happen. I'd love to do something like this again, and would definitely be willing to entertain it. The original, they call them the big three, Ken and Scott and Selden, are still around, and it would be great to kind of pick their brain and say what worked, what didn't, what would you do differently now in today's world, what would you do the same, what has to remain the same. I think one of the best things about Caligari's Clinic is that the story is what drove the scares. It wasn't that you were just going through to find scares. You were there to hear a story that just happened to also be scary. I think one of the greatest examples is probably the telephone reception room. It was just a switchboard, any other building, right? And the person at the switchboard is taking calls and routing calls, and they keep getting prank calls. It may not work nowadays with caller ID, but back then doing a prank call was what you did on a Friday night with your friends. But they had a special way of dealing with the prank callers, and so Count, at the time, who was doing the tour at this particular section, would tee up the idea that we know exactly what to do with the prank callers, and then the receptionist would hit a button on her big old school switchboard with a buzzer, and about 4 bodies would fall from the ceiling with their throats slit, dangling from the waist, with their arms down, right above the audience members, and no one sees it coming. You don't know that the ceiling's going to give way and then bodies are going to come flying out. And it just that was a great example of, it's just a story of how they deal with things at the clinic that happens to be scary. It's not just a boo for boo's sake, a jump scare.
But it's more than just someone jumping out of a door. That's cheap and it's easy, but going through and putting people up in the ceiling and dropping down, you don't see anything like that today.
No.
So I would love to see, if something does happen, Denver, let us know. We'll be the first ones in line to a haunted house like this. We love haunted houses anyway, but I think something like this would go a long way.
They're a good time. They're definitely a good time. I over the next, what is it, like the 13th, I've got nearly 16, 17 more days to do this. So every day on that Facebook group, which I think is Caligari's Clinic 40th anniversary celebration, every day I'm posting a little story and a little photograph, some of the newspaper reviews. I think at some point I need to get on the phone with a couple of the people and do an interview as well and get their take on how things go. So follow along. It's certainly fun and kind of cute, very retro, very 1980s.
Yeah.
Go join this group. It's public. Everyone can join it. The Caligari's Clinic 40th anniversary celebration is what it's called. Denver is the one who's running it, and it's been fun to follow along, and I look forward to seeing additional posts as the rest of the month goes on.
Thanks, Brennan. Thanks, Nate. It's great talking to you guys.
Yeah, thanks, Denver. It might be hard to get the church to pass off on something like that, but could we call it like a neighborhood fundraiser or a school fundraiser and get this thing to happen again?
It doesn't have to be church sponsored,
Right.
right? I feel like I've mentioned this before, but the two things the church goes the farthest with in regards to Halloween. They do the trunk or treats, they'll allow that. And then one year an organist at the conference center did a spooky Halloween rendition of a song. That's as far as they'll go. Because I get the Halloween's probably not number one on the church holiday list. But it's surprising to me how much members of the LDS church get into Halloween.
Yeah. Well, we love our holidays, right?
Right.
And Halloween just seems from probably back 81, 82. I mean, I think it's just gotten bigger and bigger over the years. Which is interesting because I remember, and I've probably mentioned this last year, that in my high school career, I felt like there was haunted houses everywhere. There was these little kind of mom and pop haunted houses just all over. And that doesn't happen as much anymore. Which I wonder if it's just because it's hard to put together or just finding a place that you can make something like that work. But I just remember you could drive up and down State Street, I felt like, and there was like 4 or 5 haunted houses you could hit back in the late 90s. But maybe I'm misremembering.
No, I think you're right. I've heard of that. There was tons on State Street and throughout the valley. I'm sure throughout the state, but I wonder how much of it is code.
Yeah, cost and time and finding a place that you could do it.
Cities that shut them down out of nowhere. If I were to make a haunted house, I would have it be more like a production, a play, and not as much those jump scare items. But still, of course, you have to include those. But going through with a guide and things are happening, there's a story.
Well, having the ringer concept just sounds brilliant. Like
It's amazing.
Like it was almost like frustrating listening to him talk just for that fact. Like, man, I'm so mad I never got to do it. Like, yeah, I'm just like jealous, like raging with jealousy, because I would love to go through something like that. And I would definitely pay more than $3. Maybe $6. Double. What do you think about it? A Big Mac meal back then was probably $3, and Big Mac meal today is $10. So $10. I'd pay $10.
Yeah, there you go. Adjusted for inflation. That would be so scary because you know it's fake. You know they're not actually going to hurt somebody. But in the moment...
Well, yeah. Like somebody just like passing out. Like that could be part of the thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's scary to know that you could pass out from your experience at this spook alley.
And I just wonder how many people... I mean, if somebody goes flying through the wall, you're like, oh, okay, that was part of the production. Very cool. It would still be cool. But like somebody passing out, somebody vomiting, like you mentioned, I'm like, I wonder how many people to this day probably still think that somebody really did pass out or somebody really did vomit from being scared.
What's that alien movie? The Fourth Kind. It's not a wonderful scary movie, but it was a movie I saw early on getting into watching scary movies. And I was so terrified of it for the simple fact that I thought it was real. They make you think at the beginning it's someone going through an interview, like for a college. It's like this university is putting on this interview with this lady, and she's talking about her experience getting abducted by aliens. And the reason I was so scared for the whole movie was not knowing if it was real or not. Once I finally did my research, like, oh, it's all pretend, right? But taking that fear and putting it into a haunted house, talking about the ringers and not knowing if something's real, in the moment it's going to be real enough that it's going to scare you. You know what I mean?
Right.
Just not knowing, did that person actually pass out? Did that person actually lose their arm here in the haunted house? I mean, if you're young enough, I would fall for it. I probably still would fall for it today, to be honest with you. But that's something I think haunted houses could benefit from.
Yeah, the style now is to do the walk around the corner and get scared type thing, right?
Yeah.
So that's why sometimes it stinks if they push you through the haunted house too fast and the people you catch are the people in front of you, and you're like, well, now I know that person's hiding around the corner.
Yeah, unless you're someone like Matt and myself, we purposely try it in a hurry to be with that group so we can see the scares and not be so scared.
That's true. Yeah.
Well, Nate, start saving your pennies. I think it's about time we open our own haunted house.
Well, we've got a busy schedule now. We're gonna have to do our own haunted house. We got to do our own pumpkin display. So much to do.
We're loading our plates. We got to quit our jobs.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to This Is a Place podcast.
See you next week.